I'm Eoin Devereux. I'm a media sociologist at the University of Limerick in Ireland. As a media sociologist, I'm particularly interested in studying audiences. And within that, I'm interested in understanding more about fans. The title of my talk today is I'm Not the Fan You Think I Am, Audiences, Morrissey and Media Studies. I've chosen to talk about fans because I think fans are an interesting way into understanding contemporary media culture. And I suppose from the very outset, I want to say that a lot of the time in public discourse and media discourse, fans are pathologized. They're people that we might laugh at or smile at for their what's seen to be obsessive behavior and so on. And it's interesting, I think, that the word fan comes from the idea of a servant or a devotee of the temple, literally from the Latin. I want to suggest to you, though, that there are far more interesting things to say about fandom, and understanding fandom is a really interesting way into understanding media culture. There is also something that I want to set aside from the outset, and that is the tendency sometimes for people to differentiate between fans of high culture and fans of low culture. As a media sociologist, I'm interested in all aspects of fandom, whether it's about rugby, whether it's about football, whether it's about pop music, whether it's about rap music. We're all fans of different kinds of television genres, different kinds of sport, different kinds of music. So instead of pathologizing fans and thinking about them negatively as obsessive stalkers, we can think about fans in terms of their creativity. Within media studies, there's been very interesting work done from a feminist perspective, using what we call ethnographic methods, looking at fans of different media genres. Now, this work is interesting because it focuses on what fans as audience members can actually do. So the work focuses on audiences in terms of their agency, their creativity. It focuses on the meaning that being a fan as an audience member has for audience members in the 21st century. And I'm particularly interested in the idea of looking at fandom in terms of identity formation. A lot of the work is very interesting because it looks at the emergence of subcultures, like punk rockers, skinheads, Teds, rockers, mods, all of these different categories of people. Goths, for example, some very interesting work done on goths in recent years. And it looks at the connections that audience members make between media texts like music, like film, like television programming, and their everyday lives, and the meaning that they take from everyday lives. It shows us how fans as audience members can become themselves producers of media content. And fandom forces us to think about audiences in a very, very different way. I'm going to turn now to talk about fandom in terms of a really interesting, iconic figure in indie music in the late 20th century. And of course, I'm talking about Morrissey. His former manager, Joe Slee, tells us he attracts this gentle adoration from everybody, but you would need a degree in sociology to work him out. I'm not sure whether a degree in sociology would help you work out such a complex figure, but we're going to try. Morrissey, as the leader of the Smiths, but also as a solo artist over the last 22 years, has been the subject of a lot of academic study, particularly in terms of the really intense displays of fandom that he attracts, and indeed he continues to attract. If you think about Morrissey in 2012, he doesn't have a record contract, he's not tied to any management company, and yet if he announces a concert tour in the United States or in Latin America or in Japan, these concerts would sell out in a matter of seconds. When I have looked at Morrissey's appeal, I think I've come across different things going on. Many fans talk about Morrissey representing some kind of authentic version of the 1980s or 1990s. And if you think about the music of the Smiths singing about the north of England, about working class life, about the streets of Manchester, about being lonely, about being depressed, about broken relationships, you can see where that sense of his authenticity is coming from. It's useful as well to think about the iconography, the images that Morrissey uses as both a member of the Smiths but also as a solo artist. So for example, lots of the record covers for the Smiths involve, working class women from drama, from soap operas, people like Pat Phoenix, for example. If you like, women who have lived hard lives, who have struggled, and so on. So lots of fans talk about the idea of Morrissey representing some sort of authentic version of white working class life. There is another side to this though, because fans also talk about Morrissey in terms of the ambivalence, the ambiguity of the imagery that he uses and how he projects himself to the world. Gay fans, lesbian fans, straight fans all have no difficulty in seeing something of themselves in what Morrissey is all about. When I have spoken to fans of Morrissey and of the Smiths, and indeed when you read fan accounts of their fandom, when fans themselves talk about being a fan of this particular kind of music, the one striking thing that you come across time and time again is the way in which fans talk about their experience of fandom in terms of the redemption that the music has given them. So the narrative is usually fans will talk about some personal context where they have been sad or lonely or dispossessed or depressed or rejected, and invariably they will talk about how the music actually allowed them a way to get through very, very, very difficult times. So instead of being the Pope of Mope, instead of being a miserablist, as many journalists might caricature Morrissey, in fact, I think the music actually works in a very different way. It's a vehicle to actually allow people, work through very, very difficult situations. Morrissey fans exhibit lots of parallels, and indeed concerts represent lots of parallels with a religious occasion. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but I think if you go to rock concerts, if you go to a David Bowie concert, or if you go to an Arcade Fire concert, for example, you will see fans behaving in a very ecstatic way, almost in a quasi-religious way. And it's interesting that when fans talk about Morrissey and their connection with the Smiths, sometimes they talk about themselves as devotees, sometimes fans describe themselves as apostles. What is striking is if you go to the Salford Lads Club in Salford, next to Manchester, you will come across literally hundreds of post-it notes on the wall of the Smiths room where fans have left a note for Morrissey thanking him for getting them through a difficult situation and so on. So there are literally hundreds of these post-it notes on the walls of the Smiths room, and invariably they're about making the connection in a very intense way between Morrissey's lyrics, between the sounds of the Smiths and Morrissey's solo music, and some personal aspect of people's lives. Okay, so when I've talked about fandom, I've talked about fandom in terms of what fans can do. Fans become producers of content, fans participate in fan communities and fan culture. And sometimes fans perform, they actually perform out aspects of their fandom. It's interesting that when 20th Century Fox axed the series Buffy, fans of Buffy actually themselves wrote an 8th series of Buffy and met to actually perform what Buffy might be about. Likewise, if you think about the opening of Harry Potter movies, or indeed the launch of the latest Harry Potter novel by J.K. Rowling, lots of fans, children, adolescents, young adults and older, will actually dress up as characters in Harry Potter. So why am I raising that? I'm saying to you that we need to think about these 3 Ps, if you like: production, participation and performance. And if we return to Morrissey, we can think about how a certain fan subculture exhibit all of these things. Earlier I've talked about the idea of Morrissey and the Smiths representing a sort of an authentic, white, working class Englishness. And I suppose what I should add into the mix also is the idea of Morrissey as a second-generation Irish immigrant in Manchester, and what that might all be about. But what is really interesting in recent years is that Morrissey's music has travelled globally, and it has been picked up by certain categories of fan in other parts of the world who have in themselves powerfully connected with what Morrissey's music is all about. Now, what I'm referring to here is the emergence in the last 15 years or so of a really strong subculture of Latino fans, particularly in Los Angeles, who have, if you like, adopted Morrissey. They've adopted his music, his lyrics. And when they talk about their fandom, they talk about the powerful connections between Morrissey and their experiences as second-generation immigrants in the United States. When I encountered this, first of all, I was intrigued by it. I was thinking, well, what's this connection? How are they making a connection between a man who is singing about things in an ambiguous way? He's ambiguous about sexuality. He has made controversial comments about political issues, about the establishment in the United Kingdom, for example. So what is the connection between Los Angeles and Salford? And then I began to think just about the likely connections that there might be. The idea of Morrissey as a second-generation immigrant is powerful. Morrissey's own status as a person who was brought up in the Catholic tradition, but also, and I think this is what really is revealing, that Latino fans, when they talk about Morrissey, they all invariably say that he sings to them in a very powerful way, because he sings about being an outsider. He sings about not fitting in to mainstream society. So if you think about the status of many Latino immigrants in the United States, the kind of working conditions that they endure, the places that they live, the discrimination that many Latino fans will encounter owing to their immigrant status, they have made really intense connections with Morrissey's music. So if you like, the culture has, to use the phrase, it has glocalized. Local culture from the United Kingdom, from Manchester, has travelled globally to become something else. I think it's interesting that if you look at fan activity, particularly amongst Latino fans in Los Angeles, you will see lots of examples of fans engaging in fan production. So, for example, running websites, hosting blogs, posting Facebook content, but also performing. There are a number of examples of Latino tribute bands to Morrissey and the Smiths. The most notable is a band called Sweet and Tender Hooligans. And if you go to one of their concerts, you will see fans, many of them who are too young, they would never have seen the Smiths there, probably many of them have never seen Morrissey play live. You see fans performing as if they were at a real concert. So the kinds of things that fans would do at a Morrissey concert or at a Smiths concert, these are replicated at a Sweet and Tender Hooligans gig. So you have evidence of Latino fans performing their fandom. They certainly dress in a very, very distinct way, exaggerated quiffs, T-shirts. There is a particular group called the Moz Crew, spelt with a K. So there's a whole subculture that has built up around the Latino following for Morrissey. So it has performative dimensions, it has production dimensions, and crucially, and when you read the kinds of things that Latino fans say about their fandom has a strong affective dimension, a strong emotional dimension. And invariably, when Latino fans talk about their fandom for Morrissey, they will talk about the connection that they make between their subjective personal experience and the lyrics, the sort of scenarios that Morrissey as a singer will actually write about. So it's a really interesting example of fan culture, of fan subculture. It's been really very well captured in the documentary Passions Just Like Mine, directed by a Morrissey fan, Kerry Cush. And it looks at the different narratives, and again, you have fans who are gay, fans who are straight, fans who are sort of very macho in terms of the gang culture they might be involved in, but invariably they all migrate to this man who sings about the world in a very sensitive way. So, in conclusion then, fandom is something not to be pathologized or made fun of. Fandom is something to be celebrated. I hope in my discussion I have shown you how, well, all of us are fans. Fandom is an interesting area of study. We see fans doing very interesting creative things. So analysing and understanding fandom critically, it's a way into, it's a key to understanding the media-saturated world that we all share, that we all live in. If you have found the talk interesting, why not check us out at ul.ie.